thought it was fascinating that there were so many links between the four talks. In a way, I guess we did a good job at pairing them. This idea that their design partakes in making a certain kind of knowledge available, and this sort of purposefulness of acts of making or acts of presenting things in a way that enables a wider sort of number of citizens or users or members of civil society. And I was wondering if you had questions for each other in that sort of arena. This idea that it was discussed like different ways of saying or different ways of presenting things, the manuals, the sort of use of pornographic imagery, concepts as like tools for making sense of a certain set of things or interactions, and then this idea of open sourcing and innovation, but in the social kind of arena. And I'm curious to hear you guys about how then, is there, can we sort of propose new rules in how we invite citizens to appropriate and take hold of what's offered in those presentations, I guess, or those topics that you touched upon?
Got any easier questions?
Yeah, right. Can we start with that?
It got me thinking about like modes of saying and ways of doing, and how you all touched upon different sort of generous sort of acts of like raising awareness in a way. Anyways, my own thoughts, too complicated. Maybe the audience has questions for us. Sure. I guess I'm getting a bit brain dead at the end. Yes.
I have a question about the pawn. The pawn. If we see, I'm actually doing a little academic research. Big data, digitization, the biggest data is actually pawn. So it's not 311, it's not the banking, pawn, whether that's images, videos, transactions, big data is big pawn. And in terms of gender sensitivity, equality, entrepreneurship, innovation, what we actually are looking at is this industry from the beginning of the civilization is controlled by men. But now it is possible that the porn industry can be actually controlled by women. So what do you think? This is my research in terms of how big is the big data in porn, and also how there could be innovation so that there could be an app so that this industry can be controlled by the women entrepreneurs.
I can't speak to big data, but I mean, I do know, like there's feminist, sorry. Thank you. There's a lot of feminist porn out there. So there's like Erica Lust. She's like the biggest name that I can think of right now. But also there's user-generated porn and amateur porn, which is huge. And that's sort of like bringing giving the power to the user for the user. So yeah, I mean, and in that sense, the porn industry itself is faltering a bit in the traditional sense of the term. So there have been a lot of like documentaries that are on Netflix about this. But yeah, of course it's good. It's democratizing porn. A lot of porn is free. So like a lot of people don't end up paying for porn unless they like maybe do the live cam stuff, which is huge, and kind of can have a personal collection with like connection with a like porn star. But like, yeah, I think it can only be good, obviously, because there is more representation from and more sort of diverse viewpoints on what porn is and what it can represent and who it is.
As a major site, have you looked at this aspect of Pornhub?
The whole website? I have not looked at the entire.
Money making and where that money goes in terms of the Pornhub?
I am not actually, because I'm looking largely not at Pornhub itself, but of generally garments and sort of like photographs that are used in the circulation of fashion imagery. So I don't know. I'm not a porn scholar of Pornhub. I'm actually not really a porn scholar. I just started this project like less than a year ago. So, yeah.
Hi, I have a question for Otto. I really liked your bringing in the Making Center. I thought that was great. And I'm wondering if you could elaborate a bit more on the micro-freedoms and the sense of virtuosity. I'm not sure that was your term, of the virtue in making. If you could say a little bit more about that.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm fairly new on trying to figure out this in a sense, but so I started, I mean, my work on my thesis 15 years ago, where hacking meant something else. Now it's mainly then it wasn't state actors doing it, so now it's state actors and it's entrepreneurs. A hackathon basically means that how to prepare ourselves for precarious labor and invent our own idea. So it's a very different, and of course also coming from a European perspective, where a lot of this kind of hacking came out of autonomous spaces and these kind of things. So it had one of my earliest encounters with this the conflict around that was a student that was really concerned because the hackathon that was run at the Malmö University, there's only anarchists in there, and he was this kind of shy nerd, so he just felt he was too threatened by that aspect of it. So it's something very different than today. So I'm just curious in a sense of how what sort of making, how can we introduce the students not necessarily with that the Making Center is an entrepreneurial space, first of all, where the idea is that you are just going to realize a material aspect of your innovation as part of your teaching in that sense, or of your education. But also in the sense of, I think the interesting part is also that, well, when we as designers talk about empowerment, and we want often to empower our students, or design is some sort of empowerment. Usually we, as designers, sort of escape into producing commodities, because then the responsibility is somehow on the market. That the empowerment happens through, I buy stuff, and the sort of liabilities and everything happens under the contracts of buying and selling and these kind of things. So we're not, when we're talking about empowerment there, it's not really about challenging power or actually taking power, or something like that. So that's a little where I'm trying to sort of figure out how to get that, what it would be a framework to start thinking about making that takes this power then seriously somehow. Because I think the main paradox that I'm encountering all the time is that I'm teaching more and more students about the vibrancy of matter, actor network, power, objects have power, and there's sort of influences of this, The more the students know that, the less impactful designs they do. The more we discuss that, design is powerful and shapes our world, the more the students do, I made a little zine. Or, it's like there's no claim of this power. It's rather making them share. So how do we better frame that sort of challenges and responsibilities, but sort of just sort of grasping more around that. I think that was just and of course you could say that. So what I've been trying to do in these, looking at state power versus civic crafts, or state crafts, in a sense. So what, when you do your liquor, is it only for yourself? Or it's usually the ethics start happening when you start selling it to underage or something like that. As long as you drink yourself, nobody, So there's like certain kind of making that are okay for you to implement, as long as you pick your own locks, but don't pick my lock or something like that. Similarly, when I went to this hacker conference and they do lock-picking workshops in the night, this lock-picking teacher was saying that, when I come to the airport and they scan my stuff and they see all my picks, I have to convince them every time that I'm interested in locks, not in doors. That is, it's something about also the fascination with the structure, the system itself. It's not necessarily about, there's so many easier ways to get into a flat or whatever, So just this kind of, how does the ethics and these kind of powers in making work, and how do we better articulate that? Yes.
So I have a question for Andrea. This is on, right? I was taken by your suggestion that Larman and his lab may become definers of taste, taste makers, as opposed to attempting to subvert some means or ways of making designed objects. And when I was looking at a lot of the films that were in the exhibition and some that you showed today, I wondered if you had thought at all about the fact that they have a spectacular quality and is, in fact, design as spectacle, something that we should think about.
That is interesting. Is this on? Yeah, okay. Design as spectacle is interesting. And actually all the videos, I don't know how many of you had seen the exhibition, but we of course had the objects on view. And we had a range of videos. And actually, Joris's partner in life and in business, Anita Starr, is a filmmaker and videographer, and she'd created all of those videos. And it really was this access point in order to share his process, because much more than just the pieces that were on display, it was about how they were made and the ideas behind them. I often think of his work as, I mean, they're just the tips of an iceberg, and it's everything else that's underneath that is so incredibly interesting. And in some ways, I think I was actually thinking about him and casting him as, not necessarily perhaps a tastemaker, but almost like a rule maker in some fashion. That, I think a lot of his work and what he is often trying to do is, again, to really like push at the edge. I often think of, when I'm looking 5 to 10 years out, I look to him and to see what types of technologies he's working with and what's interesting him and whatnot. And so oftentimes I feel like with people like that who are subverting and disputing established norms, that oftentimes those people then later on potentially are able to change some things in some fashion.
I had a question for Charlene, and then a comment. Is it Andrea or Andrea? Andrea. Okay. A question for you. So, a comment. The question for Charlene was, what kind of car was that man sticking his penis into? Because I was looking at it and I was trying to figure out if there was was it a Japanese car? Was it, there are ways in which the choice, it's not a very nice car. I'll just say it was not a great car. Whatever it was, I kept thinking Dodge Omni from the 80s. So I was trying to figure out if that was meaningful. And then I kind of looked on the internet to see what kind of cars do other people stick their penises into the tailpipes of? And they range. They really do range. So I didn't know what to make of that. Okay, so then the comment that for Andrea, I think, was you had mentioned that Larman said he wanted to design things that would be not just a few precious objects, right? So I've heard that one before. And so I looked him up and I was like, yeah, because that process with the stainless steel extrusion I thought was very cool. Yeah, he's patenting that. So I mean, in a sense he is, so this is the comment, yeah, he's got the open source puzzle chairs, but the really commercially valuable stuff, he's patenting it. So it makes me question, as I do with most people who say they want to design democratically, whether he's really doing that. So that's all. Thanks.
Oh, so yeah, I wasn't sure if you had answered your question. So I have not done a very thorough visual analysis, clearly, of the image, but now you have piqued my interest. But it just looks like a 1980s, I think, boxy European, very small car. But a Renault? Oh, you want to know? It could be a Renault, though. I was like, I like the sound of this. But I can get back to you.
We have a question over there, another one.
Go ahead.
Well, actually, just to pick up on what Andrea was saying, and also the question about the spectacle of Larman's work, I have to say that, and those videos, so I made that actually an assignment for my students in a class to go down and see that show, and it caused a huge debate, which went on for several classes, because when they saw the videos, the thing they walked away with, most of them, was that they were saying it was not really design. They thought it was bleeding into craft because there's so much handwork that was going on once those things were extruded. And so they were claiming that I was being disingenuous in giving them this assignment to see that show because I had hoodwinked them to going into a show that was really about some kind of modern day craft. And I wondered if that came up as a question as you were doing the installation and looking at the work.
Yeah, definitely, and it's great that they picked up on that. I mean, to a certain extent, Joris himself, he has his lab is 30 people deep or so, and it includes software engineers and programmers, designers, and craftspeople. He has a blacksmith on his team, and craft very much is a big part of that practice, and a lot of the way in which I often think of him and his work is almost this digital craft, because he very much is merging digital technologies and fabrication with craft techniques, and he's using the computer almost as another collaborator within that process. And so there is an overlap, absolutely.
Okay, so your response to that question, I think, added a third hand to my question. So you'll forgive me, right? So you mentioned in your discussion the way in which the distribution of the code for the 3D printing manifests a sort of loss of authorial control. And that was interesting as a kind of, you read that as losing authorial control ex post of the creation of the work. And I guess I'm interested in the ways in which we think about the existence of authorial control ex ante of the design, right? So the ones that raise the more interesting questions about control and authorship for me are the ones using the algorithm, right? Where all he does is input a certain degree of features and then the code does all of the work. And so I guess, and so now the third hand is, in addition, all of these other people who aren't him are doing a lot of the work, right? So as you think about the different sorts of places or the different sorts of humans who are doing things with respect to the design, how does he and how do you think about the ways in which we understand authorship and attribution across them?
Yeah. It's really interesting because obviously Joris Larman Lab, I mean, he named it after himself, but it's a huge team of people that are working with him on all of these things. And it was something that, to a certain extent, even within all of the texts and the essay that I had contributed to a book, which ultimately the lab had published, I always wanted to emphasize the team of all of it. So, yeah, it's interesting to pick up on that. I mean, it's hard to ignore when, his name is front and center with everything.
This makes me think of something like, this idea that, and Otto sort of hinted at this idea of, gaining a sort of wider knowledge of what's possible was making your students feel like less, or of the social implications and of how the market will eventually recuperate what we make, was sort of making your students be more gentle and contained in their explorations in making. And I think there's this trend in design today with the digital sort of revolution. I'm not sure it's a revolution. That is sort of there's a lot of claims that the algorithm, involving the algorithm in partially taking over a lot of the decision making is good because it's democratic, it's neutral, it's unbiased in a way, and I think that's a little bit of BS, but especially in some fields like architecture, for instance, with parametricism and so on. So I'm gonna come up with a question. So this idea that there seems to be design or making processes in art and design have progressively lost the capacity to claim a clear set of rules or manifesto-like rules of the avant-garde or early modernist movements, or if we go back historically, the sort of rules of ornamentation, proportion, harmony, like all these sort of our practices were very much rule-bound, and progressively nowadays it becomes much more difficult to sort of couch our practices in a set of rules in a world where anything goes and anything is possible, and there's a sort of a delegation of agency on the user, on citizens, on do-it-yourself practices. And I wonder, like, and I'm going to ask a question to Ken, so would this sort of reappropriation of very simple acts of like drafting concepts, making concepts, like how do you see that as something that could allow us to regain a certain sense of agency or power?
Well, part of the answer to the first part of this is that there's a whole field now called software studies, and most of design that is taught here uses presets. So the object of study is the software that contains the presets. Now, if you're writing your own code, it'll be in a language, so the object of study is then the language, right? So you would take it down a layer, but we're always several layers away from actually controlling the machine. So the thing to study is software and interfaces. You know, I think that's the answer. But it's actually kind of like much, much more rule-bound in that sense. But, you know, very, very, you know, narrow windows of things you can modify seemingly produce all of these very different results, but within that set of constraints. So that's the object of study. Now, the thing is that object of study doesn't belong to the field of design studies. It doesn't belong to media studies. It doesn't belong to anybody yet. And those disciplines are not very helpful as ways of thinking about it. So one might have to go back to a concept of what that set of practices is that's not something we just inherited, to kind of think that through. I think that's, you know, sort of, in terms of intellectual work about this, that's sort of now the problem.
Hazel?
Oh, I was actually going back to making a spectacle, and also Vicky's question to Otto about the making center here. And I was just thinking about, you know, how very much that is making a spectacle and has the potential to present the unruly, the kind of process and the, you know, works in progress, and yet also how in the sort of current condition in Parsons, where we're searching for a new dean, how the making center has actually become politicized as part of the achievements of the former dean, of the current dean. I apologize. So I just think it's very interesting how, you know, something has, that spectacle has also, and I'm speaking very much to an insider community here, but how that spectacle has become institutionalized in this current political climate within Parsons, with, you know, an article in the New School Free Press at the moment where students, and this is not the only place, have been citing either intentionally or, you know, coercively, the Making Center as one of the achievements of the current year, in which, of course, it's a very visible achievement. So I don't know where I'm going with that, but I think it's just this whole thing about switching of context, and also your, you know, the point about not the visibility of design, but now this particular visibility of making and within this institutional context, which you mentioned. More comment, perhaps.
No, but I think there's also something interesting in the sense of, you know, how craft is also becoming one of these words, which basically just means good. You know, if you go to, if it's craft beer, craft whatever, you know, it's just a sort of a virtue of craft in some sense, you know. And so I think there's something about how that sort of, and craft means some sort of care, and et cetera, you know. So there's all that, all this, so how can we get students to sort of take that on, but without necessarily feeling that it becomes another pressure that you know have to also achieve in the workshop? You know, I have to produce myself by now. I cannot be a good design student if I also do not do work with my Arduino and make these kind of, I mean, whatever, all this production, all this continuous achievement in every different field. So there's like this whole idea that it's about self-reliance and some sort of ethics that could work inwards in a sense. If that part is not really there in a sense, you know, the Making Center is not there for your self-development. It's there for you to start your business. You know, so there's something about how do we balance those things, and how do we, yeah, just sort of create a space for that.
Hi. I just had some questions around how we think about technology as being in the center of this rule-breaking, hacking, DIY processes. For instance, in Andrea, in your examples, In a lot of them, they put like technology at the center of this rule breaking. For instance, like how can you create the most efficient, the most optimum design is by feeding this algorithm and creating this parametric design, and which a lot of star architects, of course, also propose as being the most efficient tools for creating design. But on the other hand, I'm just wondering, where are the examples, and this might not relate to your work, which is why the examples are not there, but where people are in the center of optimum, efficient hacking projects. For example, in Mumbai, we were doing some kind of documentation that was comparing building practices in slums versus building practices in high-rises, and we were finding out how the most optimum design was coming out of contractors who were working locally for like generations, and they were really using the least amount of steel, but for the most safest construction, and the materials, they were putting just enough holes in the concrete that would make it strong, and they were making it like 10 times more affordable than any other affordable housing in the city. And that is also an example of like extremely DIY hacking kind of breakthrough, rule-breaking design. And I'm just wondering, where are those examples in the spectrum of DIY hacking, rule-breaking things that we're talking about? Yeah.
So thinking about, how technology really fits into to rule breaking. I mean, I think it's hard to divorce a lot of what we're doing today from technology and from its development. And if anything, I actually would like to hear from McKenzie about some of this. I think you might have some insight into this idea of hacking and technology.
To me, it's technology all the way down. But we tend to think that because we had the opposable thumb, our ancestors could create the tool, but it's like the tool made the hand. Like the hand evolved through the creation of the tool. Like the human plus technology is the object of study. There's no non-technical human. So when you do that, you stop thinking of technology as the new thing. It's a thing that's already around you. It's a thing you already do. And then you can not sort of fetishize it as novel as well and kind of go, well, the most appropriate form of it might be something that you're already doing or that someone is already doing because, they figured it out through practice. Mumbai, I don't know, but the famous example Mike Cooley used to give was why Gothic cathedrals stay up and Renaissance ones don't, because the Gothic ones were built by craftsmen and they figured out over 100 years how to make a flying buttress, whereas, the Renaissance ones had architects who were like, let's have a dome that's a nice shape. And it's like, I don't stay up. Go with the people who know how to build this frickin' thing. So, but they're both technologies. Like the thing is to not see it as always on the side of the novel, but as something that's always inherent in practices.
I just have an important announcement that is, I think will cement this as the conference we were all glad we attended. I sent a call out to design historians and got an immediate response. Is penetrating a 1993 Fiat Panda in your photograph.
Thank you.
I won't tell you how I found that out so quickly.
The internet explains everything.
On this fact-checking note,
you gave me the Wi-Fi password.
I want to thank everyone for spending these 2 days with us on behalf of my co-organizers, and thank the School of Arts and Design, History and Theory for allowing us to put this together. Thank you to our speakers for amazing presentations, and I will invite everyone to continue the conversation in the sort of ruly or unruly sharing of a drink and a little bit of food. And thank you so much, everybody.